All right, everyone, please grab a seat. We're about to start our development panel. I'm Nicole Zaccack, a current student at the MIT Center for Real Estate, graduating this winter. And my thesis is actually about the social impact of real estate development. So I'm incredibly honored to be moderating this panel with 4 developers ranging from many different cities and asset classes who create very impactful work and that I admire. So we will start by going down the line and having each of you introduce yourselves and answer the 2 following questions. What is the focus of the work your organization does? And how does the work relate to the social values your organization prioritizes?
Okay, I'm going to go first. I'm Alison Novak. I am a principal at the Hudson companies. My sort of catchphrase, which is unofficial, so don't report me back to the company, is that we build housing for everyone. We build housing for formerly homeless up to luxury condos. As you can see from the examples I chose, lots of different types. We've got small scale, large scale, new construction, preservation of historic housing. But what ties it all together is it's really housing. We're located in New York City. We, to date, do all of our work in New York City, although we often look at other places. I've been there for 13 years now. I started as a project manager, now I'm a principal. And over the course of the time that I've been there, I think the outlook of the company has changed a little bit, but it still has maintains its roots to this idea of leaving the city better than we found it, leaving neighborhoods better than we found them. Since at our company, we do affordable housing, we do a little bit of retail and commercial, we do luxury housing. It's really, I think, showcases what brings different people to the table or to our company to work. We have people for whom, they're diehard New Yorkers. They just want to see the city thrive. We have people who really care about climate change, and that's why they get up and come to work every morning. We have people who really care about equity and inclusion, and that's why they're excited to work at Hudson. So our overall framework is really just what can we do to make this better? And I think that that's a really important way, and I'm going to talk about this, I think, a little bit more later, that it's not just about affordable housing makes the world a better place, but how we can imbue all of our projects to be transformative. In the last year, probably, we wrote our first ESG policy, and I wrote it, and we started a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, which I chair. And so you can sort of see that this, for us, in a way, is the rigor of addressing these things is just sort of emerging for us, although the company is 30 years old and we've been committed to the ideas for a long time. I was actually hired at Hudson by one of the founders of the company who graduated from DUSP the year I was born, which he hates it when I say that. You can imagine. Especially as I get older, he really hates it. And I think that, our sort of DUSP connections run deep, and there are 2 other people at the company now who came from DUSP. We used to have 4, and one of them moved on. But I want to note also that I have a dual degree only because I paid for those 2 years, and I want to make sure that I get credit for that. When I was here, I did my thesis on gentrification. You can find it in the library probably, or online. I don't know how they handle these things anymore. But it was called The Ambivalence of Gentrifiers. It was sort of a really personal take on what is my career going to mean for me going into the private sector. And I've seen such an explosion of conversation since then about gentrification and displacement. And there's so much more research now than there was when I was in school. So if anyone wants to talk about that anytime, I'm really interested. And as a sidebar, I just wanted to mention that I also am on the board of an organization called the Osborne Association, which is a criminal justice organization. And one of the things I'm focused on for them is reentry housing for the formerly incarcerated. So that's not directed to Hudson's work, but I wanted to put that out there in case anyone else is interested in that, because I want to capture the brilliance in this room as much as I can.
So I wrote some notes to keep my mind focused. Inclusion in level playing field, and so what do we need by that in terms of priorities? So we prioritize everyone in our developments because we think interesting neighborhoods and interesting cities are the type of places that everyone exists. You could find everyone in those places, and growing up in New York, New York used to have everyone. New York has less of everyone now, and it's also less interesting to me. And what do we prioritize? For me, beyond everyone, we prioritize people of color, specifically Black and brown people, women, immigrants, and specifically people that are from under-resourced countries. Like I'm from Haiti, and so understanding if you're coming from a place like that, one of those deplorable countries, the intent of this country was to be able to come to a place and make something of yourself. And this is why when we immigrated from Haiti, we didn't go to France where we spoke the language. In school, we came to, Brooklyn, because we wanted to have that ideal. And in some respect, we've earned that and achieved that. And, you also have to look at places that have formerly been colonies, and you also have to look at places that have been negatively impacted by U.S. policy, whether war or how economically by U.S. policies. And our company, I always say that we're not really a real estate development company, right? So we're an innovation company, and we're also a company that has to be creative and disruptive. Right? Because when I first decided that I was going to call myself a developer, everyone said, no, you're not a developer. If I call them and I say I'm a developer, they say yes. But when they see me and I tell them I'm a developer, they say no. And the reason why is if you never see me, my name is Ernst. It's a German name with the last name Valery. You think you're dealing with a white person. To be honest with you, a white male from Europe, right? But then when you see me, you're like, oh, it's obvious. It's I just read something last night flying in from Buffalo to Baltimore before I flew here this morning. Lamar Jackson is our quarterback in Baltimore. And instead of saying he's a great quarterback, it's, because of his dark skin, you can't see the ball. It's like the world has to make an excuse. Instead of just saying he's a great quarterback, there has to be some other reason why he's being successful, because he's a person of color. So I look at myself and I'm like, I have 4, Ivy League degrees and I've done all of it, but when someone sees me, it doesn't fit into their paradigm. And so, I can't consciously be the type of developer that just follows that status quo. And so our company has to be a platform to allow other people to come in. When we first went to HUD and said, we want to do a tax credit deal, they told me, you'll never do a tax credit deal because you don't have a 2530, but they made all these excuses, but really they're saying you're not from the type of family that we typically give money to do development deals. And when you look at what HUD finances, it's properties and communities where everyone looks like me, right? And I've walked into HUD meetings where there's maybe 1 or 2 developers of color, but they typically work for a white firm. And so I got used to people asking me, where is Ernst when I walk into the room? Or people saying, who do you really work for? My first deal in Baltimore, this is our first not our first deal. This is our first new construction deal. And I remember the mayor came in and he was talking to me, and someone that was one of his funders for Old Money Baltimore came in, and he's like, but who do you really work for? Where do you actually get your money? And what do you actually, so to him, it didn't fit right that we built this, or that I built this. And so I've learned to say we because it makes people feel more comfortable, because if I say I, it's almost like it's an impossibility. And so we've got to kind of get around that. And so this disruption is something that's really needed. And I'll say something now in terms of, I was disturbed by the numbers that I heard, with the 82% of real estate is owned by 10% of, the wealth in this country. And I kind of, in my mind, I was like, well, the 18%, I think 17% of that is controlled by that 10%, right? Because they're the ones that have done, and you guys may not know this word, but have you guys heard of loan to own? So the whole concept of loan to own is if you're in one of these marginalized communities, I'm gonna give you the worst rates, I'm gonna give you these really awful terms, and I know you're gonna fail. And it's a mechanism to capture your 20% equity or to own it whenever I want to take it over. So you're in default, and as long as the place is like not desirable, I'll keep letting you think you own it. But the second it's desirable, I'm going to take it over. I'm going to own it. So it's almost like shelf owning, right? I'm putting it on the shelf, and when it's pretty enough, I'll dust it off and I'll take it from you. So I really think it's 99% of the wealth basically that's owned by 10%. And if you think it's you, it's no one in this room. We own 2,500 units, over 150,000 square feet of retail. You know, my business partner, who's Jewish, and he's like, Ernst, you know you're a millionaire. And I'm like, no, I had a Ford Explorer and I thought that's too nice. So last week I bought a F-150. And, you know, so at the end of the day, I know it's not me, even though it's not you guys. So get that out of your mind that you're part of that 10%. And then we can start talking about how we disrupt that 10%.
Hi, my name is Jenny Wu. I'm the Director of Development at Jonathan Rose Companies and also a CRE alum. 7 years ago. So Jonathan Rose Company is a 30-year-old company that is very mission focused on developing and investing in affordable and mixed income communities. And what we believe is that today the promises of a better life is not evenly distributed, and where you live, where your zip code is and where you live really kind of predicts what your health and what your education and what your economic status really become. I think the last panel touched on this a little bit, and I was looking for data on Boston this morning, but I didn't find any. But in New York specifically, if you were living in the healthiest zip code, you're expected to live about 27 years more than somebody who lives in the least healthiest zip code. And I think that data in Chicago is like, the gap is like more than 30 years. And so for us, what we try to do is to seek solutions that are very housing focused, but trying to equalize and distribute that opportunity as much as possible. And so for us, it's not just about affordable housing, but it's also about all the other social factors, which are shown in the circle here, which we call communities of opportunity, and it's really our company slogan is the communities of opportunity, that you also need all these social factors to try to make somebody's outcome, to basically make somebody's life that have a better outcome than just purely providing affordable housing.
Great. My name is Jesse, and I'm actually an alum of the program too. I did, well, not the CRE program, the MCP, and Dennis was my thesis advisor. And I work for a group called Shift Capital, and we are a developer, but we like to think of ourselves as an impact-oriented investment group. And kind of what we do is we leverage patient capital to catalyze redevelopment and preserve affordability in urban areas. And when I say areas, I really mean kind of a very focused part of Philadelphia. So we do the majority of our work in Kensington, which is kind of it's a pretty rough neighborhood. It has a lot of high poverty, a lot of crime, a lot of drug dealing, that kind of thing. And we purchased about 1.5 million square feet of industrial space that I'd say about half of it has been renovated, half of it is still sitting and waiting to be renovated. But we've taken that space and brought in businesses. We've brought in some retail, turned some of them into apartments. And we also acquired about 200,000 square feet of commercial space and have 115 scattered site residential and commercial properties. Now, the kind of the big idea behind what we do is that all of our real estate holdings are focused in a very small area, which we believe allows our development to kind of catalyze redevelopment, both with the work that we're doing, but also bringing in other groups to do development as well. And so if you go to, so we think that what we're doing is using our development to one, provide housing and affordable housing. So one of the neat things about kind of how we went about our acquisitions is that we did a lot of our acquisitions prior to doing our development. So we were sitting on a lot of our real estate before developing it, which allowed us to buy at a very affordable price. And part of our mission is that we're going to be maintaining those projects moving forward in perpetuity as affordable projects. So we're able to do that with our housing. And in terms of economic development, we bring in a variety of businesses to create jobs and a sense of kind of community. So we have a lot of artists that we lease to. And then we support our development we have a health and safety or a health program that all of our tenants automatically are enrolled in when they move in with us. And same thing with internet. We partnered with Comcast and provide internet to all of our tenants as well. And in terms of the actual construction and operation of our company, I should say the majority of our subcontractors are MBE or WBE, and same with within the company itself. We're a very diverse company, but that's kind of without our acquisition strategy of going in and buying affordably, I think we would have trouble maintaining the affordability of our projects over time. But that's really the key that allows us to provide all these services.
Wonderful. I'd like to start this conversation by asking each of you how you integrate your social impact goals into the various steps of the real estate development process, and how you balance these goals with the required financial returns that your investors might require of you or from your own in-house investors.
Anyone? So we really started as we got bigger, we were affordable housing developers, and so first we had to get through the HUD. And so what you have to realize about affordable housing, it's not traditional real estate. You're not, debt and equity. You're not having to come up with a ton of equity. And the debt is really, if you're doing a 4% tax credit deal, it's the bonds, right? And so the equity, you get that through a tax credit equity investor, and there's syndicators out there that go to these major corporations and they get a really great tax write-off, or they get this thing called a CRA credit. So a lot of banks do it as well. So there's a real benefit to them. And so we leveraged that. And our first deal, when they said, well, you can't do it, we ended up just taking a company. My business partner's father had done one of the first 2 tax credit deals in the state of New York. And we just took the name of the company and we said, oh, it's the same company. So it had a 25/30. So you just have to be more clever than they are, right? And so we got that first deal done and we never looked back. But as we sort of progressed, we said, well, how do we give value back to the community? So in addition to all these wraparound services, all the things that people do at tax credit deals, we basically said, we think the tenants should be part of the ownership here. And so the first thing we did as a developer is we went in and we organized our tenants. So in all of our properties, we just, we organized the tenants, and they never heard of a developer organizing them. But, how can you negotiate with someone if they're not organized, right? And so what people typically do is they find the loudest folks and they satisfy them, and then they call that organizing. And you really can't do that. And so we really empowered our tenants. We said, you're going to be our partners. And what we found was when the tenants were your true partners in the deal, they didn't just live there. They had an element of ownership. Your maintenance of the property went down. We have tenants that want, in one of our complexes is 496 units. It's right outside of Richmond, Virginia. It had a horrible record with HUD and with the community. When we partnered with the tenants, we have tenants now, they've created building captains. It's 50 acres, 496 units, 3,800 people live there, 1,800 kids. They actually police it better than we could ever police it. And they want to create penalties that were like, we think that's pretty much illegal. If someone throws trash, if they don't pick up their trash, you can't kick them out. But so our value system is it's gotta be every day. Like if you think people should have equity and people should own, then you've got to live it every day. You can't kind of say, well, people should, and let's leave it out the door when I want to build my own personal wealth. You always have to think about, okay, these are my partners because they live there. So let's keep innovating towards figuring out how to create wealth for them. Another key thing with that project is we wanted our tenants to be part of the larger community. And, so we said, well, what's keeping them from doing that? So that project, majority of the people that live there were single black females with kids. And so they get home, community association meetings are like 6, 7 o'clock. They have no childcare. So we wanted to give them money to pay them, right? Because people get paid to do things. Like no one just does something, right? And at first HUD was like, well, if we pay them, then, if you pay them enough times, they become over income and they don't qualify. And if it's a HAP contract, you got to kick them out. And so we got an exception from HUD that any payment we made to them to attend these meetings. And so guess what? Everyone became so much more engaged because they got $50 for every meeting they attended. And so, the larger community looks at folks now and they're like, wait, we actually know who you are. You're attending our meetings. And so the relationship between our complex and the neighborhoods that surround it, 7 neighborhoods that surround this complex, has improved because they're just simply talking to each other, something the Democrats and the Republicans haven't figured out how to do right now.
Well, Ernst, first of all, I'm convinced you're a genius, and I want to hear more. I think we haven't done, as far as I know, tenant organizing in quite that way, but I really love that. But I've done something similar in looking at a building where we have retail space, and retail is very difficult in a lot of locations in our properties now. We have about 500,000 square feet of retail, mostly at the base of residential buildings, and some of it leases very well, and some of it really, really struggles. And sort of being able to set our goals per project relates a lot to the asset class and who the investors are. If it's an affordable housing project and we have the city, they provide a lot of the goals for us or with us in collaboration. It's something that comes from the community, the politicians, the city government itself. If it's more of a private sector deal where we have investors who might be equity funds or might be family office money, their goals may be very different. And so how do I take kind of my values and my company's values and then kind of imbue them into a project where the people on the other side maybe care most about the return. And one of the things I can say is, we have a building in this neighborhood, it has retail at the bottom, the retail is important to the overall returns. I think the best way to make sure we get tenants who care and who are invested in making sure that their business runs well is to get people from the neighborhood. So we have a building in Prospect Lefferts in Brooklyn where one of the tenants is a community-owned, a community bookstore. They call themselves a community bookstore. There's 2 owners. One is from the neighborhood and one is from a few neighborhoods over. And when they open up a new shop, this is their second shop, they raise money from the community to do that. So you can sort of buy in. The second retail space is a restaurant that's locally owned. The owner lives literally down the street. He's very invested in seeing that survive and do well. And then our third tenant is a cooperative preschool that started in the neighborhood in the 70s, wanted to expand, and we've given them a space to do that. So those are all tenants who are really, really invested in the building going well, in the neighborhood doing well. And I think that's helped us make that argument to make those values into those projects where they might not have otherwise been there.
Yeah, and I think to kind of echo on the tenant participation piece, us too really value the tenants' involvement in coming up with these programming for their communities. And for us, we've got a community of opportunity toolkit where it basically gives them ideas, step-by-step guidances on what they can possibly implement to their program, and it's up to them to kind of come together with the community manager to decide what's the best fit for them. And then for the new construction side, we also have design guidelines that we give to the architects that prescribe, what are the space requirements for these social programmings, what kind of resident services that we want to have, and what they need to think about as they're designing the building. And then on the financing side, we typically include some social services budget into the operating expenses. And I think we're very fortunate in New York that there are a few programs out there, like the 1515, and there's also an Empire State social service initiatives that basically provide funding for any affordable housing that has social services in them. So I think between all of those, we're able to just kind of incorporate it into our projects.
And at Shift, what we do, I mean, just by nature of our projects and some of the larger industrial buildings, we've brought in a lot of kind of small creative tenants. So we have like a lot of artists, a lot of craftsmen. There's someone who does like distilling, brewing. And so just kind of by virtue of the function there, a community, like an artist type community has kind of sprung up among our buildings. And so that's, I mean, so I would say like the development itself, just by virtue of what it is, has created that. From a financing standpoint, because we're not an established, or we were not an established organization or developer, we couldn't just walk in and do kind of what we wanted to do at scale, without being pretty creative. So what we did was we went out and we raised a lot of private equity, and that enabled us to go out and do all these acquisitions. And when we did the acquisitions, we were buying this stuff around $5 a square foot. This same stuff today is trading between 40 and 50. And so we are, I mean, basically we bought a lot of stuff that was kind of just sitting there costing us money, but then we used our equity, our additional equity, to go in and renovate a lot of these projects with cash, because trying to do any of this stuff with banks and through the LIHTCs and all that stuff is it takes a very long time. And so by the time we could have gotten through that project, or that process with a couple of these properties, our development horizon or opportunity may have passed. And so we're now in the point where we've done a lot of construction with cash and equity, and we're refining those projects out now that they're stabilized with tenants. And we're also pursuing some more traditional projects with like LIHTC and new markets and that kind of thing. But that's kind of how we balance that.
Wonderful. Jenny, you mentioned the community's opportunities and the values Jonathan Rose typically instills on lots of its projects. And I think a really good example of that is Sendero Verde in Harlem, New York. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that project, and then also speak to how you won that through a competitive RFP process, and how you really had to align your goals with the city's goals, as well as your local stakeholders and your nonprofits. So there's a lot of different people playing in that process.
Yeah. Sendero Verde, which was the image that was above earlier, it's one of our ambitious development projects to date. It's basically an entire city block in East Harlem. It will be, the first phase already under construction since June. It will be built in 2 phases with 700 units. And that's affordable housing and also mixed income housing in 7 different income bands, from formerly homeless all the way up to middle income. The buildings will be designed to passive house standards. And so for those of you who don't know what passive house is, it's essentially designing a thermos with a hole on the top. And so it's super energy efficient. For buildings that are designed to that standard are basically going to operate at 20% basically going to utilize 20% of the energy that a normal building will utilize. And so out of that, 20% of the building's energy are also going to be provided by the solar panels on the roof of the building. And as an example of communities of opportunities, we have incorporated over 100,000 square feet of programming as part of the development. There is an on-site school, there's a health center, there's a senior center, there's after-school programs, and so everything to basically basically all those social factors that we were trying to incorporate and try to really improve people's lives in this project. And the RFP itself is actually very aligned with our mission. The city did require this to be a passive house project, which really allowed us to take a really deep dive into how that would work rather than focus on like broader sustainability programs like LEED or Enterprise Green Communities. And then the city also required a lot of community participation. And so we spent a lot of time working with individual gardeners on the site who had former gardens on the site to create community gardens that they're very excited to come back to. And so these community gardens are actually anchored on 4 corners of the site so that they get the most exposure to sunlight and are basically what's attracting us people as they kind of meandering through the site. And then we've also got an array of community partners in the project to create all these community services. And so I think in that sense, that was kind of a perfect RFP for us. And so we're really excited to have won that and started construction on that.
Yeah, and I think something so cool about this project is you have such a variety of age groups involved. I mean, you have a primary school and then also a senior focused center all facing this internal courtyard.
Yeah.
So that integration is going to be like kind of the heart of the project.
You saved one of the original buildings, I see.
This is actually a tenant that refused to sell. We tried. It would have been perfect.
Did a great job. Right.
And Ernst, part of EVI's thesis is to invest and develop in urban transitional areas with high residential and retail demand. How do you meet the real estate demands in these underinvested areas while mitigating potential risk of displacement of existing residents? I think all of us want to do good work, but whenever there's new money entering into a market, there's this fear that it's going to still cause some sort of displacement. So how do you try to mitigate that?
Yeah, so it's really talking to the community up front. So we won a major RFP in Richmond, California. If you guys, so there's San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, Richmond. And Richmond was at the end of the line, and it had all the negative kind of like press about it. Like, Richmond, you're gonna die if you go there. And, and I'm an urban planning dork. So whenever I go into a new place, I get on the, subway if there's a subway. And I took that subway, that BART system, to almost every end of the line. In Richmond, I got out and I was still alive, and it was like a really nice place. And then, it made me realize that, the rhetoric about a place is what people want you to know about it, because whether they're trying to buy it cheap so then they could change it, like a place that's connected by transit, a place that has Kaiser is down the street, the Social Security building, all these things happen right there in Richmond, but yet it had this negative reputation. And when you look at what's happened in Richmond, Point Richmond is, $1 million homes, but downtown Richmond, no investment. And so, but then people are buying properties. I'm like, wait a minute, that happened to Harlem, that happened to Brooklyn, that happened to DC, every single neighborhood in DC. And so I'm like, this is strategy as opposed to reality. And so, as the type of developer that I am, I went and I actually talked to all the community members. And so when this RFP was for 10 acres, literally 10 acres in a downtown that has BART, and when we got there, we won the RFP over a lot of bigger companies because we actually knew the community members. So I feel like if you get to know the community members and you make a promise to them, that's not just a promise that you're gonna kind of, by the time you've built it, oh, I'm sorry, we weren't able to do it. So we have a record of when we say we're gonna do something, we call it managing expectations. So like, if we say we're gonna give you $1 and at the end of the day we give you $20, you're so much happier. But if I told you I was gonna give you $25 and at the end of the day I give you 22, you're not gonna be happy just because I didn't manage your expectation. And so we deliver on our promises, and we make sure that we know everyone in the community, and we're not just saying that there's some process.
Alison, you mentioned this earlier about how the work of Hudson Company spans lots of different typologies. And when we usually think about socially oriented development, I think our mind first goes to rental affordable housing. But Hudson does things like home ownership, affordable home ownership, such as Ocean View Villas. You have inclusive retail, office, industrial, and community facilities like the project The Peninsula. I'd love to hear how you use all these different programs and typologies to create further economic and social development.
Yeah, I think it starts with thinking that every asset class has the power to transform. It's not just affordable housing, rental, which I think is really crucial and really, really important. But I think if we get sort of too focused on that, we lose the other opportunities, and to some extent we let people off the hook. Like, well, you're not doing that fine work, that good important work, so like you can kind of do whatever. And I just don't think that's the case or the right thing at all. So we do a lot of different things, and they impact New York City in different ways. New York City has like a lot of places in the country, has a major affordability crisis. We're not going to simply build our way out of it by building any one particular level of income related housing. We have to build a lot of different things. But it's not just that. Last year, New York had a net loss and outmigration of millennials. And I don't want to be too focused on millennials because I'm from the in-between generation, and I'm also a middle child, so I'm very sensitive to the millennials getting all this attention. But it does like make me worry a little bit. Like if young people, it's supposed to be like the most highly educated generation, very diverse, obviously very outspoken. If they're leaving New York City to go other places because New York is over, as Ernst has just told us, like what does that mean about the future of New York City? So I think that like really paying attention to like different types of projects is really important. So Ocean View Villas, just because we're here, is this charming little cottage there. That's middle income home ownership. We used to do a lot of that. Basically, it was land that was taken by New York City through foreclosure, tax liens, arson situations. A lot of land that they ended up with in the 1970s and 80s and over the 90s and the early aughts. They worked with developers and nonprofits to build homeownership, middle-income housing. There's not a lot of that now. Most of those sites have been built for that. Peninsula is a really fascinating project. It's in Hunts Point in the Bronx. We tore down a juvenile detention center that the community absolutely hated. It was a cancer on the neighborhood. There are people who unfortunately were subjected to living there, working there, and it was terrible. And so everyone's thrilled that that's gone. We're building 740 affordable housing units. I think the AMI tops out, I think, at 90%. It also has over 50,000 square feet of living wage job space. So that ranges from bakery, supermarket, film production, childcare center, a lot of different things that were coordinated closely with community groups who are the partners on the project and through a lot of community meetings. And so obviously, putting jobs there and putting childcare, we've heard from other people on other panels how that's important. But I also wanted to mention the other projects that we do that you might not normally think of as having that kind of impact. So like, for example, Cornell Tech, this is the dorm, the first student residence that we built on Roosevelt Island, where Cornell University and Technion won an RFP to build a very innovative campus focused around tech, not as cool as MIT, but whatever. And we could have just built a dorm, right? But we didn't. It is right now, and until Jenny's project is done, probably, the largest passive house building in the world, aka Universe. So that was an opportunity to do something that was really meaningful towards climate change and to showing people what we can do. Like that was scary for a lot of people involved, including our lender. But it's an amazing project and it's finished and occupied now. Or The Breeze, which is our only sort of standalone commercial project. We took an old industrial building that was mostly like a warehouse for like plumbing supplies. It's about 100,000 square feet. And now it's to use the fun parlance of creative class office building. Our tenants include, they're all local tenants. They're design firms. There's a bakery that was in the neighborhood and got priced out from its other location and moved over. There's a beverage bottling company that got its start in a local neighborhood bar and said, our patrons are here. They're the people who made us successful. We want to stay here as we expand into 100,000 bottles per month or something. I can't keep track. Facility. We rented to Ethel's Club, which is, as far as I know, the first social club co-working space for people of color specifically. They just opened November 1st, and I went to their soft launch, and their investor who was there was so blown away that they've already asked us, and we're helping them expand to a larger space within the building. So I think that those are ways that you can really have a big impact. And then the other project I just wanted to mention as a showcase is, we call it One Clinton. So this is a site in Brooklyn Heights, which if you don't know is a very Tony neighborhood in Brooklyn, where they had a library branch. The Brooklyn Public Library has some real capital infrastructure problems. They have a lot of branches where like they have to close in the summer, their air conditioning doesn't work, and often libraries are a place where a refuge for people throughout the day for a lot of different reasons, but particularly in the summer in New York when it gets extremely hot, it's a place where you're supposed to have cooling centers. So they did an RFP for the site that they felt could get them the most financial gain. And we won. We paid them $52 million for the site. We're building them a 26,000 square foot library at the base. We included a 9,000 square foot STEM lab for the Department of Education. And then we're doing offsite affordable housing within the same community board, and we're building 114 units. So that's, I think, a really meaningful project with a lot of transformative change. And there's a lot of different components to it. Because I think Majestic said this earlier, and that we have to really think about ways to like move the needle on things. And I think I've said this like 4 different ways now, but I'll say it one more time, which is that I think that in order to move the needle on how equity works and how people's lives are not, their life expectancy, their quality of life are not dictated by the color of your skin. Like we really have to think about all of the projects at our disposal and not just certain types of projects.
Yeah, and I think that message has been echoed by all 3 panels. It's like we're looking at this ecosystem. Housing is really a foundation, but something that Farajeh mentioned is, well, what if the bakery is now overpriced and you can't go to the gym anymore? It's an ecosystem of inclusivity and affordability, and that's kind of the work that you guys are doing. So I'm going to shift capital to talk about the importance, the importance of value-aligned capital. So a part of Shift Capital's logic model says that you need patient capital, you need skilled mission-driven staff, and you need value-aligned partners as key inputs needed to realize positive outcomes. Can you please elaborate on how patient and value-aligned capital is a key ingredient to Shift Capital's success, and how you creatively structure your capital stacks to realize your development projects?
Yeah, I mean, basically, what we do wouldn't be possible without our investors. And in March, we just closed our first investment round. We raised about $42 million. And the way that the fund was structured is that it's a 7-year fund with a 3-year extension option, which, for the area where we've purchased all these buildings, we think is, maybe not next year, maybe not in the next couple of years, but definitely within 10 years, it will be kind of within a growing development bubble in the neighborhood there. So we feel comfortable, from a fundraising standpoint, that we'll be able to deliver returns to our investors, that meet their needs, and at the same time, what they're giving us is kind of hands-off patient capital that enables us to really go out and do what we're doing without a lot of strings attached. And in terms of like an exit, we are looking at, because the way we're developing everything is that, with affordability in mind, we're committed to keeping our residential rents affordable, meaning around or below 100% AMI, and we're committed to leaving and making our industrial spaces actual working spaces. So I feel like often developers are kind of tempted to take these really wonderful, functional, historic industrial buildings and convert them into like loft apartments and that kind of thing. And I will say we have done a little bit of that, but the majority of our industrial buildings are being re-tenanted with people who are making things. And so they're bringing jobs into the community, which helps to kind of improve or revitalize at least the economic portion of that, but also the economic and kind of cultural aspect there. And so if you look at our capital stacks in general, we were very equity dependent in the initial build out of our projects. We then moved to kind of like a refinance model. There's a bunch of projects now that we have a little bit more of a balance sheet that's established that we're going a more traditional route where we are layering in historic tax credits, new markets, LIHTC, and then a whole host of other kind of state and local subsidies. So we've had to be pretty creative about how we went through all the financing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that all of you would probably agree to, is that these projects, in order to realize these impactful projects, you really need to think creatively on how you finance them, and it's often much more complicated than traditional real estate might be. So a challenge, but worth doing when it creates great work. Just finalize the group question before turning it to the audience for a Q&A. Developers often have to do these pre-assessment tests to kind of figure out what potential risks there are or impacts. But more and more developers are actually trying to measure the realized or the actualized impacts. I know that Jonathan Rose is partnering with the Columbia Public Health School, and then Ernst, you're a part of READY, which are two ways that we're trying to index or measure specific impacts. Could you guys talk a little bit about the development of these tools and what you think the future could hold in trying to measure what health and well-being impacts are being actualized by the real estate industry?
Yeah, so we don't have an actual measurement in terms of these impacts yet, but we did, like Nicole mentioned, partner up with Columbia School of Public Health, Harvard School of Public Health, and Dartmouth Institute of Health Policies, and enterprise community partners and success measures to basically form a team of researchers that's going to try to come up with methodology on how we can actually measure these benefits of integrating social, health, and educational inside a housing project. And so some of the other, we haven't quite figured out what exactly that looks like yet. If you ask me a few in next year, I might have more answers to that. But we do want to somehow collect economic data to it. So, rent delinquencies, turnovers, even like visits to ER emergency room to try to see if we can quantify what that economic benefits is against the cost of providing these services. So it's to be determined.
So we created this thing called READY, Real Estate Developer Index, and it was in partnership with folks from here. So Dana Cunningham from the Center Collab, Community Innovators Lab. And my lawyer said, don't ever put this out because you will get sued every day. Because part of what we were trying to do with READY is really, hold people accountable, hold people, meaning developers, accountable, and say, if you go out and you say you did this, this, and this, can we see it? Like, what are the promises you made, and what were the results? Because typically developers walk into a community, and the gentleman that was from Pittsburgh, right? The developers from that community, they figured out the game. They figured out, they've made all the political contributions and everything, and so they don't want new developers to come in. Right, and so these communities, like in Baltimore, is kind of like that too. Like if you live in the west side of Baltimore, and you've never heard of certain developers from the east side of Baltimore, it's really like so localized, and that's a form of control. It's like this is what you get, and so what we were trying to do with READY is kind of open that up. Like let's look at developers. Like I want to get this type of project. Let's look at your company that might have done that, and let's bring that company to Baltimore, but they create these hurdles. And first of all, they won't let the community even learn about you. And so READY was to just let people know that there are other people that may be thinking along the ways that you're thinking and some of the things that you're looking to do and some of the resources that you have, that's public resources. So the thing is, capital likes to leverage public resources, so capital, it's the most communist thing I've ever scene, right? It's like they hate socialism when you're giving money, redistributing money, but they love it
Always
with
turn to the government for help.
exactly. So I don't know. I've been doing this long enough, for about 22 years now, so I'm getting into a lot of these rooms, and I get on these boards, and you hear what's happening in these places, and they don't want any accountability. They don't want you to actually shine light on what they do. I had the president of a major bank that I serve on a board with, and I'm now on some commission with him. He walked into a room, and he said, it's not a black people, black and brown people, we tried. We have a bunch of money for them. It's a supply problem. They don't want money. And it's almost what they said when the entire MBE and WBE, we'd love to have women-owned companies working here, but we just can't find them. I had a tech company in New York, and my friend was the HR, and I'm like, why aren't you hiring more black folks? They're like, we don't. I'm like, look, I go to MIT a lot, and I see a lot of people of color that are really sharp. Why not go and find them? Oh, they don't fit into the culture, right? And so at the end of the day, I'm losing my train of thought, but it's really just, you want to put these things out there, but there's the powers that be, they don't want you to see the truth, right? And so that's why you can't get capital from them, right? You've got to find a way to leapfrog them and be disruptive, because they have their instruments that keep them in power. Like major corporations, the first thing they do after they've made their trillion is go create a foundation. And that foundation is a tool for control, right? It's like when they want to say this is the real problem or to distract you, they do a study. And then they're backed by universities. They put big names behind it. You should believe this. And at the end, it's not the truth, right? And if we really want to get to this truth, we have to be disruptive. And the biggest disruption, it's akin to when I was growing up and I landed in Brooklyn, like the neighborhood we were in, if you wanted to take a cab from that neighborhood, you would never find it. If you were in Manhattan and you said you were going to that neighborhood, the cab would drop you off. Now, if you're a black male, they would never pick you up. And something called Uber. And then the other thing is, the majority of people driving those cabs were like Haitians, right? We drive the cabs here too. But we couldn't get rides to our own neighborhood, but we were subjected to these medallions. And these medallions cost so much money. And Uber, and I remember, so I have the fortune of being friends with Mitch and Frida Kapor. And I remember being out and I was talking to them, and Frida's like, there's this new thing, it's Uber, it's gonna change it. And I said to Frida, look, it's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And they had put money into it. And she's like, why is it dumb? And I'm like, well, I grew up in New York. You have to have a medallion. You can't, and I'm like, these people are gangster. And she said to me, we're billionaires, we're kind of gangsters too. But you had to have that much money to be able to go through all the lawsuits, right? And so Uber changed it all, right? Now, as a black person, I could go and get a car as much as they don't want to pick me up because your picture's there. They have to because they can't, so you can actually disrupt things with technology. And that's why I like coming up here. I like talking to Phil Thompson because Phil doesn't even live in the present. He lives in the future somewhere. And that's where we need to kind of live. We need to live in the future and think of how we're going to disrupt these systems so that all this, because everything we're presented with today is to maintain some sort of status quo. And so we've got to, completely disrupt it, or else we're not going to get anywhere. And real estate is one of those places where, it's not like California. I remember going out there dressed like this. They're like, no, we don't trust a suit. You have to wear a t-shirt and not smell so great. But at the end of the day, real estate's so traditional, and I got caught up in it because I have a real estate degree. You get taught a certain way, and it's like, this is the only way, capital. And then I started looking and saying, oh, when I refinance my building in good neighborhood, I get 30-year term, and I got 2% no points. I refinance my building in bad neighborhood, and it's 8%, 10 points, and all this other stuff. They really send you the hard money. So it's like, No, they tell you all these things, but at the end we have to disrupt it. Where do we get our capital? And it's not going to be easy because they will sue you. They will sue you. Today I landed in Logan Airport and I walked longer than my flight to get to my lift. Right? So like that's a taxi lobby that's saying, okay, these billionaires are going to sue us to like have the right to have Lyft and Uber. We'll show them. We're going to say yes so that, the lawsuit that these billionaires have put against us don't crush us, but, we'll show them. We're going to make you walk so far that you're going to say, especially in the cold, right? I'm just going to go downstairs and take a cab. So we just have to have enough money to withstand the lawsuits and enough brain power. And you guys should stop going and working for these corporations that are really like maintaining a status quo that doesn't benefit any of us. Not one of us in this room are in that 10%. I guarantee you.
And I think this conversation about how technology could disrupt real estate could lead to such innovations. Like if while we're talking about IRRs, you're also making the metric of we also decrease asthma attacks by X%, or kids are missing X% less days of school. Why are we not thinking about those equal to our financial returns? And that's really where we should be with real estate. So we're going to turn it over to the audience for a few Q&As. Please raise your hand and Kitty will come by with a mic.
All right, we actually have 5 minutes for questions, but I'll allow 10. Is that all right? Thank you. All right, you're right here.
I'm pretty loud. Hi, I'm Chi-Chi. I had a question that Ernst started to touch on around proximity. I went to a talk this week with Brian Stevenson, who's doing great things for criminal justice reform, and he talked a lot about proximity, and it had me just reflecting on the tension between an interest in real estate development and the opportunity to be proximate to the community. And I was just curious, in your work, how have you managed being proximate to communities and understanding their needs with the fact that a lot of real estate development teams are fairly nimble and you're working on a lot of different things at the same time?
Is that for me? Oh, sorry.
Anyway. You want to start?
It is now. Okay. So one of the things that we do, we have a lot of community stakeholders who we work with, like other CDCs, and just folks in the community, and we work together to kind of come up with. I mean, we strategize on target properties in our portfolio that make the most sense to develop. And then kind of alongside those properties, these groups will come in and help support the development as well. So what that would look like, or what that does look like, is along Kensington Avenue, which is kind of like a bustling corridor with it's called the L, so it's like an elevated subway line. We have a number of storefronts, like mixed-use properties. And we've developed a couple other CDCs have developed a few. And then there's kind of a joint plan in place on how to care for the avenue, so picking up trash. So kind of like one of those business improvement districts. So I guess that's one thing we do. And I had some other idea, but it's left my mind now.
For me, it's time. Yeah, it's spending a lot of time with people, and so I operate on a 36-hour day as opposed to like a 24-hour day. Yesterday I was in Buffalo, and there's two phases of real estate. There's building the relationships, and then there's actually just executing. And our project management teams, they just execute, but like on our relationship building, and you don't just build a relationship when you need something. And I learned that from an investor, right? This investor would call me. He's a tax credit investor out of Stratford Capital. He was the chairman of the board, but like when he heard about me, he flew from Boston to Baltimore just to have coffee, and then he flew right back. And I'm like, whoa, people do that? Take a flight just to have a cup of coffee? And on my birthday, he'll call me. So like when we actually interact with communities, you have to be there. You have, like, if this is something that's important to you, you have to spend time with them. And so, I just spend a lot of time with the communities that we're partners with. And it's not just when you get the deal. After the deal, you spend time with them because you can learn a lot from them. And then maybe it leads to another deal, maybe it doesn't. But you're genuine about that relationship. And that's one of the things that there's no substitute for it unless you have a lot of people in your organization, just as much as the people executing deals, the people that are maintaining those relationships. And that's what major, investment companies do anyway. They maintain, that's why you see those MX bills are so high, because they're maintaining relationships.
Yeah, I think for most of our project, we rely on public-private partnership, and so we always go out to the community, and a lot of times also because we're not just building homes for people who are living in the building, but we have public places in the project that are going to be utilized by everybody in the neighborhood, and so we always seek their input before the design or while the design is in progress, just so that everybody can, chime into what they feel like is the best for this neighborhood and really believe it and buy into it. And a lot of times we find that, if they really have been part of the process from the beginning, they tend to be your advocate too as the project is going on.
I agree that we do a lot of things other people have said, that you can't wait until you need something to start that relationship. I think with some of our more public-private partnership type projects, there's already sort of a system there. Whether or not you think it has the right level of rigor is definitely debatable, but there is a system there for interacting and engaging with neighbors, politicians, other stakeholders who are interested in the project. And we have other projects where that system doesn't really exist. Something is as of right, something is sort of outside of that system in a way. So then we have to make the choices about how we're going to engage. And we do that at different levels. That's really the honest answer. If there's a block association, we always go and introduce ourselves. Like the first thing is just say, we're going to be your neighbor and we want to be a good neighbor. Here's our site plan. This is how far we're going to be away from your house. This is who you call if it's too noisy. But that doesn't necessarily mean we say, what would you like us to build? That's the honest truth. Like that's not always how we approach things. And I think that in doing that, we've had a lot of surprising conversations, things that we've really learned that we might not have anticipated. And that's been really useful for us to be able to make the project better and to make that relationship better. And then it goes on through the life of the project. So, we have projects where when we open up the leasing office, we do coupon programs with the local merchants to drive people who are coming to visit our leasing office out to get a cup of coffee at the neighborhood shop when they're done. Hopefully they'll move into the building, they'll go to that coffee shop for the next 10 years, who knows, but at least we're getting them out there. And we pay for the coupons 100%, the businesses don't pay for that at all. Or when the residents, once they live in the building, we do programming for them, and we try to do that. Like if we have a yoga class in the building, we have it with a local yoga instructor. So there's lots of different ways to sort of manage and develop those relationships. Anecdotally, one thought I had regarding surprises you learn when you're trying to relate to the community and maybe you haven't been there before, is with Osborne, where they were gifted a defunct prison by the state and decided for the purpose of turning it into a reentry facility. So this is primarily for men coming out of prison who don't have another place to go. They would end up in the homeless shelter. They can come to this building for a short period of time. They get social services on site. They can return to their families. There's a lot of different pathways out of that type of housing. And when we did our community outreach, one of the things that I was a little bit surprised by, honestly, and maybe it's just my naivete, is that the community was really happy. I think there was a fear that we're going to put people who've been in prison into your neighborhood. And they said, those are our people. There are people coming home. And I thought that was just a really beautiful, powerful thing that I wouldn't have known. And a lot of people on the team wouldn't have known unless we'd gone out and asked.
My name's Stephen Bird. I'm at the Center for Real Estate. I want to thank Nicole. I think she did a really good job on the panel. Some of you guys said you need some billionaires. If you know anybody at NPR, I think she needs a time slot. So my question is, it's actually, I've taken a class with Jesse Keenan at GSD, and the class is on climate gentrification. And so we're focused on Miami, and what we're finding is a lot of talk goes into people getting displaced with housing, but what's not as much talked about is, and Jesse kind of touched on it, is these kind of people who make things, the small mom and pop brick and mortar shops that are getting displaced, and where do they fit into this kind of relocation due to climate change that's going to happen throughout the rest of our lives. So the kind of model that we're looking at building is this idea that, and when I say cooperatives or co-ops, developers are like, they're usually very against that. And the model that we're trying to basically build is these small businesses, and I'm not sure exactly what the critical mass number would be, but the idea that they would contribute part of the capital stack in the beginning, the initial capital, and basically be the equity. And because of that, you basically would only need maybe 300 or 400 basis points as a risk premium, and the amount that you're not getting, in the teens, you're able to basically lower their base rent, and that's really their fixed capital cost. Their fixed cost is their rent. That's the biggest thing for these micro businesses, and then the labor is kind of the variable cost. So it's a subsidy to them, and that's kind of an alternative model than just a for-profit bonus. So the question, I guess, is, do you think that would work? And is there a role that developers play in that, or is this completely take the developer out?
I'll take that. So one of the things that we do, one of the things I think that we do with I know we do with our tenants is that we will kind of bankroll their fit out and amortize the cost of that fit out into their lease. And I think that's, if you're trying to bring artists and other makers into a building and to have a business there, that's often an expense that they're not able to do. So we work with a lot of people with vision and who want to build something, but not necessarily, who don't really have the means to do that. So we, as a developer, are taking a risk on the tenant fit out, for these various businesses. And we do look to offset that a little bit, like through guarantees. We also, if there's a huge fit out, that's not something that we'll necessarily do entirely by ourselves. We would find another way to kind of reduce some of that risk, but that's something we have an appetite for and do.
So another part of this is like, if you're a small business, you don't know how much back-of-house storage space you're going to need. So this idea of having a collective flex storage space for the businesses, and then kind of like industrial, and just kind of like more of a community, kind of the early stuff of Bloomberg, maybe of like having collective financial support in terms of letting them map out kind of what they're growing as a business, accounting, having like a centralized frame in place, stuff like that. Are you guys doing anything like that?
So what's interesting is we did not intend or have a plan to do that, but that kind of evolved in our buildings. So there's I'll give you an example. There's someone who's making kombucha, which is like a fermented tea, and another person who's doing mead, which is mead. And they're very synergistic in their uses and needs, and so they've kind of combined into one space where they're doing all their production, and then they have like a tasting room that they set up.
Amazing, great. Thank you, Alison, Ernst, Jenny, and Jesse. That was a really thoughtful conversation. Really appreciate it. Everybody.